Private First Class Ryan Caldwell's world collapsed while shopping with his pregnant wife at the Nebraska market during his leave. The young soldier broke down crying in aisle 12, overwhelmed by his upcoming deployment to a combat zone. His wife didn't know how to help. Other customers stared and whispered. But the 94-year-old greeter watching from the entrance walked over with a look in his eyes that suggested he understood something about war that nobody else in that store could comprehend. What Marcus Henley said next changed everything. Welcome to Stories Between Us. Before we begin this powerful story, please tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to help keep these stories alive. On a cold January morning in 2025, in the small town of Grand Island, Nebraska, Marcus Gramps Henley began his shift at the local market at exactly 6 a.m., just like every day. At 94 years old, standing 5 feet 7 inches tall, with silver hair and blue eyes, he was the perfect embodiment of the kindly elderly man who greets customers. In his old blue checkered shirt, navy blue vest, and carefully polished black shoes that he shined every morning, he seemed like an integral part of American small-town life. His co-workers called him Pops because he treated customers like a real grandfather would. He smiled at children, held doors for elderly ladies, and helped families with heavy loads. He'd been working there for 3 years, and no one had asked where he came from or why he continued working at his age. George wasn't talkative about such matters either. "Good morning, welcome to our market," he would say in that familiar, warm voice to every customer. But George Patterson's story wasn't the simple tale of a greeter. Hidden in the old photographs at his home was a young soldier's life-and-death struggle on the shores of Normandy. At the bottom of his bedroom drawer, a Bronze Star medal and Purple Heart lay gathering dust. But George had never shown these to anyone. For him, the past should stay in the past. That morning, everything was normal. Customers came and went. George was polite and cheerful as always. But at 10:30 a.m., a moment was about to unfold that would change his life forever. Private First Class Jake Morrison was only 23 years old. This young soldier on leave from Fort Carson, Colorado, had come to the market with his pregnant wife Sarah to buy baby supplies. Jake had that youthfulness that war hadn't yet touched, but his eyes carried the weight of his approaching deployment. Since Emma was 6 months pregnant, Jake was doing the shopping, and the young man stood in the baby diaper aisle, gripping the shelves with his hands. "Jake, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Emma asked with worry in her voice. Jake said nothing. He just stood there, between the shelves, as if carrying the world on his shoulders. Then he suddenly collapsed, a complete emotional breakdown. He fell to his knees and began to cry, uncontrollable, choking, desperate crying. "I can't do it, Emma. I can't," he whispered through his tears. "How can I leave you and the baby? What if I don't come back? What if I never get the chance to be a father?" Emma was shocked. Jake had never behaved like this. Her strong, determined soldier husband was now crying like a child. She tried to help him, but didn't know what to do. Other customers began staring and whispering. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record video. "Shh, Jake, please," Emma tried to calm him. "Everything will be okay. You're strong. You'll make it through." But Jake's crying intensified, and breathing became difficult. Though he hadn't experienced PTSD yet, the anticipation of war was tearing him apart. And Emma, 22 years old, pregnant and helpless, didn't know how to help her husband. It was then that a figure quietly approached through the crowd. George Patterson had noticed the situation from the entrance. 70 years of military experience had taught him to recognize when people truly needed help. When he saw the young soldier's breakdown, he felt something stir within himself. It was as if that young soldier from 1944 had awakened again. He walked toward the aisle with slow but determined steps. Other customers moved aside when they saw him. The authority George carried at that moment wasn't the kind a 94-year-old market employee should possess. This was the authority of a man accustomed to command. "Emma, isn't it?" George asked, his voice containing surprising strength. Emma looked up and recognized the old man. "Yes, you're the greeter from the market." "George Patterson," said George, then turned to Jake. "And you're Private Morrison. I can see your tags." Jake raised his head, his eyes red and swollen. "Yes, sir?" George knelt down. At 94 years old, on that cold market floor, he knelt beside the young soldier. And then he did something the crowd gathered around them never expected. "Son," said George, his voice suddenly changed. It was no longer just the voice of a polite market employee, but the voice of an experienced war veteran. "Look at me. Look into my eyes." Jake looked, and in George's eyes he saw something no one else in that store could understand. These were the eyes of a man who had seen war, faced death, lost friends, but survived. "What unit are you assigned to?" George asked. 82nd Airborne, sir, Afghanistan." George nodded. "I was a paratrooper, too, in 1944, 101st Airborne." The crowd fell silent. Emma's eyes widened. Had this elderly market employee fought at Normandy? "Were you at D-Day, sir?" Jake's voice was a whisper. "Utah Beach, June 6th, 6:30 a.m." George's answer was sharp and precise. "And know this, son, the fear you're feeling right now, it doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." George continued speaking, but now he wasn't just talking to Jake. The crowd gathered around them waited silently to hear the stories coming from this 94-year-old man. "When I jumped from that plane, I was 19 years old," said George. "As young as you. And you know what? I couldn't sleep that night. I threw up twice. My buddies were in the same condition. None of those big, brave paratroopers actually felt brave." Jake's crying had stopped. Now he listened, as if mesmerized. "But here's what I learned," George continued. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing your duty despite the fear. And that day, on the shores of Normandy, it wasn't easy for any of us. But we thought about each other. We thought about those waiting for us at home." George placed his hand on Jake's shoulder. "Right now, you're afraid for your wife and baby. That's normal. That's natural. But remember, you're going to protect them. Not just them, but thousands of innocent people like them." Emma had started crying, but this time not from worry, but from emotion. This old man's words were creating change in both her husband and herself. How did you do it, sir?" Jake asked. "How did you overcome the war, the loss, your fear?" George closed his eyes for a moment. Memories from 81 years ago came alive in his mind. The losses on Normandy beaches, the moments he lost friends, but also the victories they achieved. "We didn't overcome it, son," George said quietly. "War changes you. You never return to your old self. But that's not a bad thing. It makes you strong. You understand the value of life better. And when you come home, when your wife and baby are in your arms, you'll know better than anyone how precious that moment is." Someone in the crowd pulled out their phone, not to record, but to research something. "George Patterson, 101st Airborne," they murmured while searching. "Sir," Jake asked, "do you ever forget? Can you sleep at night?" George laughed, but with a painful smile. "For many years I couldn't sleep. In my dreams I was always there. But over time I learned that carrying those memories is my duty, to keep our losses alive, to remember their sacrifice." The person with the phone suddenly gasped. "Oh my God," they said loudly. "George Patterson, you're a Medal of Honor recipient." The crowd paused. Emma's jaw dropped. Jake looked at George in amazement. "Is this true, sir?" Jake asked. George bowed his head. "Things from the past," he said modestly. But the person on the phone continued reading. "Lieutenant Marcus Henley, 101st Airborne Division. Remained behind enemy lines in Normandy for 72 hours, carried wounded comrades, and stopped German advancement. neutralized 23 German soldiers, saved the lives of 19 American soldiers. The crowd was shocked. This elderly market employee was one of America's greatest war heroes. "Why do you work here?" Emma asked. "I mean, you're a hero?" George smiled. "Because being a hero stayed in the past. Now, I'm just George. And here, I can help people like you. That makes me happy." Jake stood up. Tears were still in his eyes, but for a different reason this time. "Sir, I'm sorry for behaving like this." "Don't apologize, son," said George. "Everything you're feeling, I felt too. And you know what? These feelings will make you a better soldier, because you know what you're going to protect." George turned to Emma. "And you, beautiful lady, you're going to be a hero too, because waiting at home is sometimes harder than going to war. But you're strong. I can see it." Emma was crying but smiling at the same time. "Thank you," she whispered. George pulled an old, worn letter from his pocket. "This," he said, "is the last letter my wife wrote me before the war. I've carried it with me for 78 years. He handed the letter to Jake. "Read it." Jake opened the letter and read aloud. "Dear George, I know you're afraid. I'm afraid too, but I'm also proud of you, because you're doing what's right. Go, do your duty, and come back to me. I'll be here waiting for you, every day, every night, and when you return, we'll build a beautiful life together. Loving you forever, Linda." Jake's voice trembled. "What date is this, sir?" "June 5th, 1944, one day before D-Day." "And your wife, Mrs. Mary?" George's eyes misted. "I lost her 2 years ago. We were married for 67 years. And you know what? I fought thinking of her every day. In every difficult moment, I heard her voice." Jake handed the letter back to George, but George raised his hand. "No, son, you take it." "Sir, I can't. This is yours." "It's yours now," said George firmly. "Mary's words weren't just for me. Those words are for every soldier going to war. And now, you're one of those soldiers." Jake took the letter, holding it in his hands as if it were a sacred object. "But in return," said George, "give me a promise." "Anything, sir." "When you come home, hold that baby in your arms every night. Tell him his father is a hero. But most importantly, tell him his father is home, safe, because that will be the real victory." Jake's posture had changed. He no longer looked like a broken soldier, but like a warrior who understood his mission. "I promise, sir." George extended his hand. Jake shook it, but George pulled him close and embraced him. "Go with pride, son, and return with pride." The crowd gathered around them began to applaud. But this wasn't loud applause. It was respectful, emotional applause. Some were crying, some were calling their relatives. An elderly woman approached George. "Sir, my son is also a soldier. He's about to be deployed for the second time. I don't know what to do." George turned to the woman. "Then you're also a warrior, ma'am, because being a soldier's mother means fighting too." A young man, perhaps in his 20s, approached shyly. "Sir, I want to join the military, but my family won't let me." "What do you advise?" George thought. "Son, military service isn't done by force, but by choice. But first ask yourself, is this for your country or to prove yourself?" "For my country, sir." "Then convince your family. Show them this is your decision and it's made for the right reasons." Meanwhile, the events at the market had begun spreading on social media. Someone had live-streamed George's conversation with Jake, and the video was starting to go viral. Shared with the title, 101B2 Hero Working at Market Console's Young Soldier, the video received 1 million views in 1 hour. Store manager Dave Mitchell came running. "George, what's happening here? Customers are crowding around." George smiled modestly. "Just helping a young man, Dave." Dave listened as someone in the crowd told George's Medal of Honor story and couldn't hide his amazement. "George, you really—" "Old stories, Dave. What matters is now." But the crowd wasn't dispersing. People wanted to talk with George, take photos with him. Some shared their own war stories. Others talked about their military families. An elderly man, perhaps 75 years old, approached George. He held an old photograph in his hand. "Sir, my name is Thomas Chen. My father worked with your unit in the Korean War. He might have known you." George looked at the photograph. His eyes lit up. "Walter Chen, of course, little Bobby. You're his son." "Yes, sir. My father talked about you a lot. He always said George Patterson was the bravest man." "How is your father? Can I see him?" Robert sadly shook his head. "Unfortunately, we lost him 5 years ago, but he talked about you until his last breath." George's eyes misted. "He was a wonderful person, a good friend to me in Korea." This encounter affected the crowd even more. People now understood that George wasn't just a Waterway veteran, but a legend who had served in many wars over decades. Emma had been watching silently throughout this time. Finally, she approached George. "Sir, I want to ask something. After experiencing so much pain, so much loss, how do you still maintain your hope?" George looked at Emma, seeing the fear and worry in the young mother's eyes. "Beautiful lady," said George, "hope isn't about maintaining it. It's about creating it. When I come here every day and smile at people, I create hope. When you bring that baby into the world, you'll create hope. When Jake returns from his deployment, he'll have created hope." "But the world is so complicated now," said Emma. "Social media, news, everything is so negative." George nodded. "Yes, the world has changed. I don't even fully understand the internet," he said, laughing. "But people's hearts haven't changed. Goodness is still goodness. Courage is still courage. Love is still love." Jake joined in. "Sir, what do you think is the biggest difference between your generation and ours?" George thought. "You want everything immediately. We were used to being patient, but that's not a bad thing. You adapt quickly, learn quickly. War requires that anyway." "What are we lacking?" "Listening," said George. "Listening to the elderly, learning from the past, and most importantly, understanding the value of silence." It was noon, and George's break time had come, but he couldn't leave this crowd and go. Manager Dave approached. "George, if you want, you can leave early today. This situation is a bit—" "No, Dave," said George. "These people want to talk with me, and I want to talk with them." Jake and Emma realized it was time to leave. Jake approached George. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me, son. Go, do your duty, and come home. That's thanks enough." Emma also hugged George. "Are you a real angel?" George laughed. "No, beautiful, I'm just George, but angels are real, and today you saw one." As Jake and Emma left, the crowd applauded, but Jake turned and looked at George one last time. "Sir, when I return from deployment, may I visit you?" "You're always welcome, son. I'll be here." George Patterson's life changed after that day. But he didn't change. He still came at 6 a.m. every morning, still greeted customers politely. But now people looked at him differently. Thanks to the viral video, old soldiers, military families, and young soldiers began visiting him. George listened to all of them, tried to help them all. Jake Morrison deployed 3 months later. Every day he was gone, he read the letter George had given him. And 6 months later, he returned safely. The first thing he did was visit George. Emma gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. They named him Marcus Henley Caldwell. And George, at 94, still works at the market. Because for him, helping people has no age limit. Sometimes the strongest stories are hidden within the most ordinary-looking people. Sometimes an elderly greeter at a shopping center can teach a young soldier what war means. And sometimes the secrets of the past create the hope of today. The most important lesson George Patterson taught was this: being a hero isn't for a moment, it's for a lifetime, and real heroes don't exist under spotlights, but within daily life. Do you know someone like this? Someone who appears ordinary but has an extraordinary past? Share with us in the comments. And if this story touched you, like and subscribe. Because stories like this need to be heard. With love from Stories Between Us.